In her 2008 essay Gothics and Grand Guignols, Violence and the Gendered Aesthetics of Cinematic Horror, Brigitte Cherry shares her research on the female horror audience and its preferences. After having questioned 140 women, she found that they generally enjoyed gothic, supernatural, and suggestive horror movies over gory and explicitly violent films. This is due to the fact that the former appeals to femininity through main female characters and their development, eroticism, atmosphere, fragmentation of identity and gender, and representation of transgressive, monstrous feminine sexuality. Cherry also mentions that women tended to prefer experiencing emotions linked to the uncanny valley over the disgust felt when faced with slasher film gore, which would typically be seen as a hindrance to their enjoyment unless it served a narrative purpose or helped push the aforementioned suggestive and uncanny aspects of the film. This indicates that, when done well, extreme gore can overlap with more emotional themes to create an aesthetic that women enjoy, like in Hellraiser, mentioned as a favorite movie by most of the study's participants. Thus, as a baseline, feminine aesthetic in horror is generally marked by an optionally gory supernatural story driven by female characters' development with a strong emphasis on atmosphere and sexuality.
I feel like I could do just about anything.
Ginger Snaps, the 2000 Karen Watson and John Fawcett cult classic, has been coined as a feminist movie enjoyed by a vast majority of women, thanks to its relatable depiction of the North American female experience and to the fact that it ticks off almost every single requirement of the feminine horror aesthetic. The film follows two sisters, with the youngest, Brigitte, taking up the role of the audience, and the oldest, Ginger, getting her period for the first time, feeling her body and attitude change.
Leads cancer of the spine, Ginger Ann, or tuberculosis.
This is directly paralleled by her growing as a werewolf when she's almost immediately attacked and turned by a lycanthropic monster, an often used metaphor for discovery of identity, raw sexuality, and community. She is shown discovering her eroticism and autonomy as a woman, beginning to wear increasingly revealing clothes, flirting and sleeping with boys, experimenting with drugs, and acting more aggressively and snarkily than before. Her symptoms eventually worsen, and she understands that her sexual desire is actually a lust for blood, realizing that she is slowly losing herself and enjoying the suffering that she brings upon her victims.
You like it. It feels so good.
Another movie often associated with the feminine horror aesthetic, close to Ginger Snaps both in subject and tone, is Jennifer's Body, which explores a similar discovery of sexuality and bloodlust through transforming into a monster. The violence they commit comes from a rot eating away at them, growing within their minds. The idea of female rage, seen in both of these movies, is also an appealing part of the feminine horror aesthetic, bringing forward an added layer of relatability by having a woman fighting against her oppressors in a raw fit of anger. The visual violence in Ginger Snaps is rarely gratuitous, with every injury or death being meaningful to the plot and allowing for character changes and development. This means that, when it comes to visual effects, the focus is put more so on Ginger's physical transformation mirroring her transition to womanhood, such as her tail, face, and fur instead of graphic gore.
Daddy, you want some?
Interestingly enough, in movies directed by men, gore is usually used almost as eye candy or shock factor, while in movies made by women, it more often has a narrative reason for being there. For example, in Ty West's X and its prequel sequel, Mia Goth's Pearl, gore is used very differently. X has Lorraine, one of the main characters, have her fingers chopped off during the movie. This, however, does not affect her ability, personal development, or relationships throughout the film, and it is never mentioned again. Meanwhile, Pearl's mother's gory death in Pearl, a film which loosely follows the Wizard of Oz's storyline, is meant to reference that of the Wicked Witch of the West, and it is shown that her passing brings on disorder both in Pearl's mind and her surroundings, paralleling each other with visuals of rotten food and dead animals. This leads to other characters questioning her state of mind and her mother's whereabouts later on. It is about seeing every part of the process of violence, both the committing and the cleaning up, along with its lasting consequences. Going back to Ginger Snaps, just by the way it treats its characters, the film also brings forward a reversal of the classic horror movie gender roles. The main protagonists are two morbid teenage sisters with multifaceted personalities, while most of the men in the movie are underdeveloped, one-dimensional plot devices or jokes that are usually killed off quite early on. Occasionally throughout the movie, the audience can take glimpses into their minds, in which they objectify women and see them as trophies to collect. Later on, Ginger is shown objectifying men in return. Putting aside the male characters leaves much more time for the audience to focus on not only the main female characters, but also background female characters and their connections to each other. Some notable examples are the school bully who, despite her hatred of them, warns the girls about Sam's potential sexual intentions, along with the girl's supportive, happy-go-lucky mother, who reveals that she would gladly run away with her daughters and leave her husband behind.
What about Dad?
The atmosphere is also strongly established, with theatrical sets adorned in perfectly placed chaos, dynamic lights coming from unspecified sources, a melancholic score, and carefully thought-out costumes and props. A particular scene in the school's hallway, around the film's climax, encapsulates Cherry's feminine horror aesthetic very well. The atmosphere is heavy, with tense music, faulty lights, Halloween decorations scattered about, and a missing poster of Ginger's first victim hanging on the wall. Brigitte arrives with a cleaning trolley to get rid of the evidence of Ginger's fresh second kill, but she comes face to face with the janitor crawling on all fours and Ginger walking slowly behind him.
Oh my god.
There is a huge emphasis put on sound here, with an interesting contrast between fear and sensuality, with the neons audibly flickering, a constant low note being played, the janitor's heavy breathing and crying, and Ginger's heels clicking loudly, a sound usually associated with erotic femininity. Her bloody face is uncanny and unclear under the lights, closer to that of a wolf than a woman, and she toys with the janitor before making the conscious choice to kill him by plunging her hand into his heart. This marks a point of no return in Ginger's character, where murder is no longer accidental or necessary. She even compares it to masturbation, an activity often seen as taboo when done by women. She also comes onto her sister in a strange, incestuous way, claiming that they are barely even related anymore. This is where the question of identity even more strongly comes into play, and where a common queer reading of the film stems from. Ginger is unsure of who she is, and she is losing herself in her bloodlust and pleasure. It is a scene that, when compared to the traditional slasher film, uses gore to put a lot more focus on character and emotional impact rather than shock value.
I said I would die for you.
No, you said you'd die with me, because you had nothing better to do.
All in all, the feminine horror aesthetic, whether it is based in real hormonal science or internalized societal expectations, is simply an ensemble of ideas that can be applied to a storyline and its characters. Of course, as all things linked to gender, not every single woman will enjoy historical themes more than splatterpunk, and not every woman will be disgusted by gore and intrigued by erotic monsters. However, the pure enjoyment of horror movies will forever be a genderless concept.